You know, you can tell a lot about a person by the home they live in, can't you? I mean, you just tell, if you were to go to my house and you were to survey it, you can tell a lot about me. And you can tell a lot about famous people by the houses that they live in, too. Here's the house somebody lives in. That's not bad, is it? 110,000 square feet in southern Florida. 110 rooms, 58 bedrooms, 33 bathrooms. It has a 20,000 square foot ballroom and 3 bomb shelters. That's quite a home, isn't it? And who would you imagine would live in a home like that? Donald Trump is exactly right. It's one of his homes, and get this, not even his most expensive one. But you can tell a lot about Donald Trump by one of the homes that he lives in. Check this home out. That's John Travolta's home. What do you already know about John Travolta looking at his home? Yeah, he flies airplanes. He is big time in the aviation. In fact, he lives in an exclusive estate of about 125 other homes where the people there fly to and from their jobs, either daily or weekly. They have their own 1.25 mile landing strip. This enables John, who designed his home, by the way, to look like a control tower, is able to park his Boeing 707 and his Gulfstream jet, depending on what he decided to take for a spin to buy groceries on that given week. Tell a lot about him by his home. Or you can tell a lot about this guy. This is MJ's home. Michael Jordan. And with him being an athlete, as you would expect, this is what you find in his home. There's an indoor-outdoor swimming pool. There's a tennis court. There's a full-length NBA regulation basketball court. He has a 6-hole putting and chipping green. And in his basement is a gaming room with a huge poker table. Because Michael likes to do a little bit of gambling. You tell a lot about him by his home. This home doesn't look too much when you first look at it, other than kind of sprawling estate. That's where Bill Gates lives. And the interesting thing about this, if you were going to be a guest at Bill Gates' home, you would receive a survey before you ever came. They would take the information on that survey, they would program it into a computer chip that you would receive upon your arrival at Bill Gates' home. Based on the information on that chip that you have with you at all times, when you go from room to room, the lighting will be changed to your preference, the music will be changed to your preference, the temperature will be changed to your preference. So the house becomes customized to what you want it to be. Pretty sweet, huh? Anybody have that in their home here? Just out of curiosity, anybody have that? Yeah. Now, my home is programmed permanently for whatever my wife wants it to be. So that's just the way it works in our home. By the way, his home is valued at $113 million. Property tax is $1 million a year. You can tell a lot about people by their home. You can tell a lot of person by this home. That's Jesus' first home. And we can tell a lot about him and a lot about God by his first home. Jesus' first home was a stable. And his first bed was a manger. And as it turns out, this wasn't just a starter home. It was a metaphor for what God is like. You see, Jesus is the Son of God, who became like one of us in order to reveal God to us in terms we could actually understand. And Jesus' revelation of the heart and nature of God the Father did not begin with his first message. It did not begin with his first miracle. It didn't even begin with his first words. It began with his birth in a stable and in a manger. And as it turns out, God is often nothing like we had imagined, and everything like we need. Let's see, if you've ever been to a children's Christmas program, then you're probably familiar with this line taken from the biblical narrative. It says that Mary gave birth to her firstborn child, a son. And they laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. Everybody heard those words before at some point? Yeah, it's pretty common. But let's kind of back up a little bit and make sure we understand the feel of what's actually going on surrounding Jesus' birth. See, it just so happens that Caesar Augustus, who ruled most of the known world at that particular time, decided that he needed to make sure that he was getting all the tax revenues that he needed in order to fund his military operations to keep security and the exploits that he, as Caesar, had determined that he would do. And so he decreed that a census would be taken so that they could know exactly how many people there were and that taxes could be collected appropriately. One particular young man, whose name was Joseph, had returned to the city of Bethlehem, which was his hometown, in order to register for the census so the proper taxes could be levied. When he made his journey to the town of Bethlehem, he took with him his brand new bride. Her name was Mary. And while she had been married only a couple of months, she was very, very pregnant at the time. But nonetheless, even though it wasn't required, ended up for some reason taking this journey with Joseph. Now when they got to Bethlehem, they encountered a problem. There was no place to stay. Normally what they would do is they would stay with relatives. That was normal. Hospitality was a huge deal in this culture. It was unthinkable that a family member could come and you would not put him or her up for lodging. And since this was Joseph's hometown, we could only rightfully assume that he had to have some kind of relatives in the area. But no relative was willing to put Mary and Joseph up for at least a couple of nights. Now, maybe it's because they were just so crammed with other relatives there was no room. But I ask you this. If your home was crowded with relatives, but a different relative came and one of them was 9 months pregnant, would you find room for her? But none of his family there did. I don't know. Maybe it was because of those vicious rumors that are already being circulated. Mary's only been married for a few months, but she's 9 months pregnant. And even back then, they knew the gestation period for a human baby, and they could do simple math. 9 months for a baby, married, 2 or 3 months. We know what that means. I wonder if Joseph isn't the man of character we thought. Or maybe she was sleeping around with somebody else. But the suspicions were everywhere, and perhaps conjecture, it makes sense. That's why suddenly there was no room, even in his hometown, for Joseph and Mary. Well, if you couldn't stay at somebody's house, you stayed at the inn. So they made their way to the inn, but when they got there, they found out that it was already booked up. See, there would have been many Roman officials there to take the census. There would have been many Roman soldiers there to guard the Roman workers because there was a lot of hostility between the Jews of Palestine and between the Romans and the Roman government. And so it would have been filled primarily with Roman citizens, Roman government officials, and soldiers. So there was simply no room for them there. So they ended up bunking in a stable. Now, we don't know exactly what this meant. Many of the ancient inns were 2 stories. The top story was actual lodging where guests would spend the night and be refreshed. The bottom level was actually like a barn or like a stable where the travelers could put their horses or their donkeys or their camels or whatever they were with. They would also put whatever goods they were carrying, store them in the downstairs, and often the servants would sleep down there watching the animals, protecting the goods, while the classy people were able to go upstairs and spend the night in a hotel room. Perhaps it was something like that. If hotels were constructed that way back then, normally right next to them, either through a construction or near a cave, there was a place to stable the animals and store the goods. We don't know whether it was a lower story stable. We don't know if it was a cave stable right next to the inn. But the bottom line is Mary and Joseph ended up bunking in a stable.